Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu is a small city of just under 100,000 people located southeast of Montreal, halfway to the U.S. border. We biked there in August of 2020 to explore Quebec's Route Verte series of bike trails and paths, and we were not disappointed.
The first leg of our trip was a 17-kilometer ride to Parc de la Cité in the suburb of Longueuil. Leaving the plateau in Montreal, we went across the Jacques-Cartier Bridge, which has good bike lanes and even better views of the city. The bridge is the steepest part of the whole trip.
After the bridge, we arrived in Longueuil, where we went through some bike-friendly residential streets before officially getting on the Route Verte. It's paved, and at this point it separates and goes in a completely different direction from the road.
About a kilometer into the path, there's a circular structure that brings you up a bridge to get over train tracks on the highway. This bridge gives a really good view of the Montreal skyline above the train tracks.
Heading down the ramp, it was just a few kilometers of straight riding, first through a power transmission corridor, and then on a bike path that follows along a larger road but stays largely separated.
After this, we arrived in Parc de la Cité, or City Park, which is a good rest stop after about an hour of riding. Right by the bike trail, there were benches and picnic tables overlooking a lake, but there's also a pavilion with more amenities if you go further in.
The second leg of the trip follows the Route Verte for another 13 kilometers to Chambly, a city of about 30,000. Past the park, the bike path alternates between going through the woods and going along the edges of residential areas, with an occasional field too.
This part of the trip is very straight, flat, and comfortable, so it shouldn't take too long, although there are a few speed bumps near the residential areas. Also, runners and rollerbladers are pretty common on this stretch.
Approaching Chambly, there's a bridge and a small rest area with a fountain to fill up on water. From here, it's just 2 kilometers to the center of Chambly, which is actually probably more oriented to tourists than the final destination on this ride.
This small city has a prominent waterfront on the Chambly Basin, with lots of shops, restaurants, boats, rentals, and a good view of Mont Saint-Hilaire. It's also home to Fort Chambly and the start of the Chambly Canal, both of which are National Historic Sites of Canada.
The third leg of the trip follows the Chambly Canal for another 18 kilometers to the final destination, Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. The first half of this is mostly gravel and slightly inclined, and it goes by a bunch of locks on the canal that you can see boats going through.
Around halfway through this third leg of the trip, you'll reach St. Thérèse Island, which has nice, large, paved bike lanes on a road with minimal car traffic. After this island, there's a choice between continuing on the path between the canal and the river, or switching to the road on the mainland.
We continued on the path and got some nice views, but we found the gravel here a little harder to bike on. Also, you can't get off until you reach downtown. On the return trip, we took the main road for this segment instead, which has good bike lanes for most of the way.
And with that, you're in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. For us, the trip took around 3 hours of actual biking time. A bit more on the way there, a bit less on the way back.
Going there and back on the same day would have been doable, but we wanted to relax a bit, so we got an Airbnb for the night. Unfortunately, we were woken up by a loud freight train going through the middle of the city at 3:30 in the morning, which we didn't expect.
The next morning, we walked around the city. It seemed like a bit less of a tourist destination than Chambly, but it was still enjoyable and worth seeing. The old downtown has a bunch of shops and restaurants, and the area around the canal was very nicely set up in an Oasis theme. That's Desert Oasis, not Wonderwall Oasis.
Normally in August, the city is the site of a big hot air balloon festival, which would have been nice to see. But this year it was cancelled due to COVID-19. It's definitely something to keep in mind for travel in future years, though.
Language-wise, both Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu and Chambly are less bilingual than Montreal. Establishments that serve a lot of tourists are almost always used to English, but if you go further into these cities, then you should keep in mind that lots of people will be less comfortable in English, especially if they're older.
If you're interested in practicing French, then this is a good opportunity. Otherwise, we still recommend trying in French to the extent that you can, or at least asking people if English is okay before using it. Keep in mind when you're planning your trip that many shops, cafes, and other small businesses in Quebec are closed on Mondays.
After a morning in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, we got on our bikes and headed back to Montreal. We considered taking a different route and going west from the city instead of north, but it seemed like roads that way were much less well suited for bikes, so we took the same way back, along the Route Verte.
Overall, we would definitely recommend this bike trip from Montreal. What we've seen so far of Quebec's Route Verte has been really excellent. We haven't been everywhere in Canada, but Quebec's rural bike infrastructure is some of the best we've seen in the places we've lived or visited.